Good morning, everyone, and welcome on in to today's webinar where we're talking about merchandising strategy and getting product moving off the shelf. As everyone is trickling in here, I would love for you to hop in the chat and mention your company and where you're joining us from today so we can get a sense of who's here in the audience with us. And as everyone's Zoom invites and calendar meeting notices pop up, I'm going to have everyone jumping in here. We should have a pretty good crew today. I see some great people joining us. Hey, Ian from the Greater Need. Thanks for joining us today. All right. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Jamila. Thank you for joining. Perfect. So we will get started here then as everyone else is trickling in. So for those who don't know, my name is Jordan Buckner, founder of Food Bevy, the online community for food and beverage founders, really to help provide great information and practical advice so you can take your company from startup to scale. And for today's conversation, we're really talking about merchandising strategy. So there's a lot of information about how to reach out to buyers, how to get in touch with stores and trying to get your product on the shelf. But really that's only the beginning of the work. The real hard part comes in actually getting your product moving off the shelf, as all our panelists have to attest for today, right? You need those products turning, you need those customers. Hey, James, we need those customers actually getting the product off the shelf there and things moving. So what I'd like to do is just give a couple ground rules for today. We're going to go about an hour here. If you have any questions for our panelists as they come up throughout the presentation, please make sure just to drop those in the chat and I will ask those to our panelists throughout. So if Mark says something, you're like, hey, I want to follow up on that, just drop it into the chat and I'll include that into the conversation. And then at the end, we should have a little bit of time for Q&A as well. So with that, and welcome everyone, I'd love to pass it over to our panelists to give a quick introduction and we will get started. So Ayeshah, why don't we start with you?
Hi everyone, I'm Ayeshah. I'm the founder and CEO of Mason-Dixie Foods. We're one of the fastest growing frozen food brands in the category today, producing clean label baked goods and a soon to launch all natural breakfast handheld. Also the co-founder of Project Potluck. So if you're a person who identifies as a person of color, please join our LinkedIn group and get online and sign up for our newsletters. It's an initiative just designed to help anyone in the product space, food, bev, personal care, to really get access to resources, information, and other founders and like-minded individuals on growing their own brands and their careers. Thanks for having me, Jordan.
Thank you and welcome. Next, I'd like to introduce Mark. Come on up if you're in the food and bev space. Pretty sure everyone here knows Mark, but we'd love to you just to give a quick overview of what you're working on now.
Hey, how's everybody? Mark Samuel, founder of Iwon Organics. We're an organic legume-based snack company out of California. Sorry for my location. I'm sitting in my car at the production facility. So this is where I plan on doing this deal today. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. And Mark is in the thick of it, just like all of us as brands. The work never stops. And Mark also hosts a number of LinkedIn live videos and has a podcast. So definitely make sure to check those out. And I also like to introduce Tina with survey.com. Tina, come on up.
Hi, my name is Tina Adolfsson. I'm the data innovation and marketing lead at survey.com. We do retail merchandising at scale in an Uber-like, Lyft-like model. And that gives us national coverage at scale that is affordable for all the emerging brands. And we have coverage that is strong enough to also do the Fortune 500 food brands, which are also our clients. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. Thanks, Tina. So Mark, why don't we start with you? I know you've done a big expansion in grocery and retail. I'd love for you to talk about your experience with grocery in terms of getting your product in stores, and then also what you've done to get your product moving off the shelf, both what's worked and what hasn't.
Sure. So we've been fortunate to have different opportunities come our way over the last few years as far as distribution, both in natural and in conventional. I would say, depending on who's listening or watching, it depends on where you're at with your, with your brand. It also depends on how much money you have and the like, which is always the biggest component that oftentimes isn't talked about enough. The main focus for us was to be able to choose the partners and have the opportunities in front of us that we really wanted to go after. There's going to, of course, be different ones that come your way, and you've got to choose and decide whether or not those are going to be right for you. So for us, we're in Sprouts and Kroger East and Whole Foods and the like. And so we've just had those opportunities. We sat down, had the meetings, and then, of course, had to decide internally after we went through the cost structures and margins and slotting and the like, to decide whether or not the partnerships are going to be right for us. So we're sitting in a really strong position for that. We still, again, week to week, month to month, have different opportunities that come our way or that we're presenting to that are decided internally. And I think every company, brand, founder should be doing just that. And as far as moving product off the shelf, we're doing everything that we can. So there's a lot of different strategies beyond just promotion, and having that calendar in place as far as where you're spending and why, digital coupons and the like. And then, of course, combining all of your social efforts to be able to, again, help you move product off the shelf. Most importantly, not just move product off the shelf in terms of trial, but also making sure that your customers are loving the product as much as you do, so that they're coming back to buy again.
I love that. And Mark, to dive a little bit deeper, I know there's a couple different levels that you can do in terms of promotion, right? You can do distributor discounts with them, often versus in MCBs. You can do kind of retailer specific discounts. You can do promotions, from social and outside of the store. Which areas are you kind of doing all of those, and like which areas are you found most effective at actually moving the needle?
All of them. I mean, you're doing a mix of everything. Our head of sales handles all that. I get to do the fun stuff, as they say. I give him autonomy, and of course he comes with what we're doing and why we're doing it. But at the end of the day, it really is a mix of all. But within all of that, you just need to be super careful about the spend. And the gem that I hope everybody would take away is that this is a penny business, right? Every dollar counts, and if you are constantly promoting, you're moving in the wrong direction. If you're constantly providing something as far as a free good, you're not moving in the right direction. The goal in any and all promotion is to get trial. Especially in today, there's no demos and the like. And the goal, the premise is to get trial. And then the bigger goal is that the customer comes back and is willing to buy at full price. So those are just key pieces that, again, I hope everybody would take from that strategy.
No, definitely appreciate that. And Ayesha, how about you? What have you found are the key levers you've been able to experiment with to actually get trial and get that product moving off the shelf?
Yeah, so obviously we're a frozen food brand, so it's one of the most challenging categories to promote in. I always joke, I'm like, I don't get to be vitamin water and hand out bottles at the Metro, right? So, and beyond that, it's not just even a microwavable right now, the sandwiches will be, but currently we have frozen dough. So even to demo, it's actually quite challenging for our brand because we typically have to either have a trusted relationship on site with the retailer to go ahead and go in the back and bake off in their, catering ovens, or we have to be able to bring pre-baked product. You can't sit there and have a customer wait 30 minutes. So, from that standpoint, in frozen, it's been really, really critical to consistently promote It depends on the retailer too. I think one of the biggest things that you have to get access to pretty quickly as a brand is data. You need to know your baseline. I was just having a conversation earlier today with a prospecting founder who is trying to get her product, or is about to get her product into Whole Foods, into an entire region. And I asked her what her velocity was, and she was like 20 to 40 units. I was like, there's no way that's your velocity. Like, that's not happening. Try again. So I was like, if it is, then you should be everywhere right now, because that's phenomenal. So, it's really, really important to get a good baseline together, because as Mark was saying, you need to understand how to measure your success too. Incremental sales. I mean, you got to think big CPG is looking for 0.001% growth at times. But, so you showing 200% growth is phenomenal, right? And it really doesn't take a lot. If you start at 1 unit, 200% growth, it's nothing. So you have to be able to start with a baseline in order to know if the promotions are effective at the retailer level. So for example, frequent shallow TPRs at Kroger for us has worked really well, because what we're learning about that consumer is they only buy on sale, unfortunately. Kroger is a very interesting retailer. But then there's chains like Whole Foods where consumer may be a little less price sensitive. So when you are on sale, you actually get a huge lift off of it, because they're like, oh, this is not something I would have bought, but I'll splurge because, they went in and they put their stuff on sale. So, it really just depends. And I think there is no magic trick as to knowing what a good baseline velocity uptick is going to be. You have to measure that. So, we followed advice all the time, and you have to just track whether or not it was successful. Like when we first started promoting, we were like, oh, we got to do $1 off. And you do that and you realize there's no difference from $1 off at some places to 50 cents. So you do have to try it and realize you may lose some money doing it, but you gotta try all the mechanisms. And then here's the other thing, then you got to try it all different times a year, because maybe $1 off doesn't work, during the holidays, but it works in the summer, So be open to measuring your success and benchmarking it as frequently as possible.
I love that. One question that comes as a good follow-up on there is what process are you using to actually measure that lift? Because sometimes the sales can, when they're going through distributors, you don't get all the retail data. Like, what have you found as ways that you're trying to track that as best you can?
So the best way, we get access to data from our brokerage company once a month. It's not dynamic where I can take an Excel sheet and sort it. I'm literally taking screenshots. But, there's a 104-week PPA, price promotion analysis, I think. I'm not the salesperson. So, but that 104-week view gives you all your price fluctuations by account or by category. And it shows you the price point, the number of units being sold. And so if you're getting incremental lift off of that, so let's say your price point goes back down and you're still seeing that little bar is raised up a little bit, it was a really effective promotion. If it doesn't, and you can create this yourselves. You guys don't need to have the fancy, you could do this yourself. You can start, especially like, for example, at Whole Foods. It's fabulous that they provide access to their vendor portal for any supplier, because you can track, your sales by store that way and have a good snapshot too of whether a promotion is creating lift within the week. You don't have to wait a month. Like I have to wait really 8 weeks. So it's more progressive that way. So that's where I would kind of start.
Yeah, I love that. And so for those who don't know, right, so Whole Foods, if you're starting out with them, get access to their vendor portal, because you can actually get access to store level sales data like the day or two after that event happens. And so you can see by unit, by store, by SKU, exactly what's selling and what's moving. And so that's incredible amounts of data that you don't get with most other retailers or distributors even. And so make sure you keep an eye on that. And one kind of area around there is, right, you want to make sure that you're measuring that 2-week lift after the promotion runs, so that yet you're telling, like Ayeshah mentioned, like what's your baseline, how many sales were you able to, or products were you able to move during the promotional period, and then what's your lift after that, so you can really determine how effective it is and that you're making money as a return from that. And then Ayeshah, one other thing, like where have you found things effective? Like, since you're not doing demos, I guess, are the promotions really effective? Are there certain types that you find are more effective than others right now? I know you kind of mentioned the lower kind of rates at Kroger and stores like that. But is it really those, or are they like buy one get ones that are moving the needle too?
It's still retailer by retailer. Like we did BOGOs at Kroger and they didn't work as effectively as frequent promotion did. But when you're at Publix, we got our first BOGO last fall and that was phenomenal. So it really depends on how that consumer is trained to shop, right? You also have different tactics for different purposes. So we wanted a BOGO to run because we wanted trial on new flavors. So if you're a brand that has multiple flavor sets, and you want to enhance trial on some of those other ones, then a BOGO is really great because their chances are they're coming for their core favorite flavor, but half off, I'll try apple cinnamon, right? So they'll splurge if it's on a severe discount. And honestly, people are like, oh, BOGOs are expensive. Nothing is more expensive than demoing at 100 stores. Okay. So like, you want to use promotions effectively, but also be cognizant what makes promos expensive is whether or not you're going and able to basically charge those direct or if you're going through your distributor. So distributors typically have markups on top of your promotion. So always keep that in mind as you're factoring in your total spend. There's usually a small admin fee that the distributor tags on to the promotion to program it. So be wary of that as well as you kind of go along. But again, it all goes back to understanding that retailer. Ask your buyer. It's not even just retail sometimes. Some of this category, I'm sure Mark has way different promos that are way more effective in his area than I do in frozen. So it really, know your category, know your buyer, know your retailer.
Love that. Tina, this past year saw, complete disruption of doing things like demos, and there were out of stocks across, every grocer and retailer. Things are trying to stabilize a little bit, but talk a little bit from your perspective in terms of like what problems brands face and being merchandised, and what tactics and strategies you found that are really helpful.
So echoing what Mark said, it's really important to know what stage that you are at. So during 2020, this is, repeat for everyone, the ones that had already gotten their SKUs into the stores, like the buyer had already approved them, they were in the sets, they did very well because as the big brands got sold out, they got trial, and usually trial at full price. But over time, we realized we were doing less of the promotions. The retailers weren't running as many. Absolutely nothing of the showy promotions like, Gatorade, basketball hoops for March Madness. But instead, it was all about packing out. So we found ourselves helping clients by doing pack outs, by putting things from the shelves onto the end cap, because the end cap became additional shelving for anything that was important. Places like Whole Foods turned off all of their hot food bars and used that for additional displays. And places like Roche Brothers used little picnic tables in between every other register to allow some of that browsing that happens normally in a grocery store, where you kind of see things as you're looking for what you're looking for. Well, with 6 foot difference and there's really not a lot, that's where that impulse purchase was coming from. It was from those every other one picnic tables with the indulgent things, healthy things, new things. So that was what really changed last year versus every other year. But what always works, if you do promotions that are not necessarily the price promotions, but you do that merchandising on the shelf, anything that explains your brand really well or explains how to use your brand does incredibly well and has a great chance of staying on the shelf or on the aisle for a lot longer than you paid for. A great example out of hair care is to talk about permanent versus semi-permanent hair color. The stores left those signs up for months and months and months, and that ended up being really, really useful. The people that got an end cap up last April and May, so for example, Friska, which is a wellness supplement, and they had a whole range and it just fit so well with last year. They had digestive, they had sleep, they had energy, they had stress, they had a male and a female. Basically one of anything that you would need for anyone in your family. Their display in the CVS down the street from me is still up. It's been up for 9 months. Other people have had a baby in that time, and he's had his display very well promoted for a very long time.
No, I absolutely love that. I mean, that brings up a couple of things. So what's the best way for a founder to approach getting on-shelf signage with a retailer? Like, what are retailers really accepting of? I know it kind of varies, but what are they kind of accepting of, and how do you go about, pitching that?
So same as Ayeshah said, it's very much by retailer, by category, and by location. And that's one of the things that survey thinks. We think that every shelf is slightly different. So, Target in Boston, in the protein shakes area is very different than 7-Eleven Boston protein shakes. So know your retailer is very important. But one thing, always keep it simple. One of the things that has worked very well with signage is if there's a tray where it's not fussy to put it on, it's not going to look funny, it's not going to sneak out, be crooked, that always helps. Anything that's easy to follow, so it's color coded for you to put the SKUs in or numbered for the SKUs, that will always work well, especially in a very planogrammed retailer. Things that describe your values doesn't necessarily go always on the shelf, but they might go really well on your packaging display. I honestly think that when you're spending money on a cardboard display that can have, the 3 sides, maybe even the 4th side that communicate, let your product packaging talk about your product and let the sides talk about your brand values. So a great example of that is Just Water. It's water in a cardboard box, so it's a lot more compostable. It's not in a plastic single-use bottle. And that's what they stand for. And that is all over their signage on the sides. It has nothing to do with its water. It's not differentiated water. It's water. It's great. But the differentiation is people who buy boxed water are thinking about the environment.
Thanks. And I think that's another key area that a lot of founders don't take advantage of at the early size is that off-shelf placement and getting stand-up displays in cabs or even, areas like you said in the hot food bar. And, I found that it works on 2 different levels. One is there's national programs or regional programs that the retailer have, but then a lot of that also comes down to your relationships with the stores and the store managers, the store buyers, and how well they like you and your brand. I know with T-Squares, we got a free large placement set just because we asked the buyer in store, like, hey, how do we get access to this? And he's like, I actually have a gap next month, I'll just put you up there, right? And so that spot normally would have been a couple $1,000, and we were able to get that for free. So those relationships really matter. Mark, coming back to you for a sec and kind of to back up a little bit, you've done a really good job at kind of putting together that sales strategy and how you approach retailers. What have you found is really working really well as you and your team are having those sales meetings in terms of like what buyers are looking for right now and how you're presenting that?
We try to talk less. I know that's been talked about, more. I've been talking or posting about that subject. It's kind of like sales 101. Less is more. And so a lot of key words today are conversational. That's one, try to keep it conversational. Number 2 is doing things that are a little outside the box. I think the whole deck strategy, 6, 7, 8, 15-page deck strategy is a little dated. I think data can work for you. If you're early, you don't have it. So I would almost say use that to your advantage. I could talk on like 7 bullet points here. The idea that the us versus them strategy, again, sort of dated. So these are just key pieces that we try to take into meetings. Again, we have a deck, right? Our deck is 6 pages. I often say who, what, when, why. But I almost like to leave a little bit of silence in the room, as I say. It allows for prompting of conversation. Again, it's as salespeople, we love to talk. And the ones who are really successful have a mechanism in the back of their mind that shuts it off. And so if you kind of take those 5 or 6 key pieces and put it into something really strategic, you've got a different conversation at the table. I'll leave you with that. If you don't think that you have a us versus them that looks the same as the us versus them that comes in the room after you, you're tripping. If you don't think your data makes it look good for you, and then the person who comes in after has the same thing, you're tripping. So keep that in mind as far as your strategy when you're having a conversation about your brand.
That's so key, right? Everyone has that deck where it's the chart showing your competitors and you have all green check marks and they have a bunch of X's, and then they do the same thing coming in. And so it's almost, talk about what's different and what's your key benefit, but know that there's going to be different customers for different products also. So it's not a gotcha moment. And then, Kate has a question, Mark, kind of diving in what you said about early brands using that lack of data to their advantage. What do you mean by that, and how have you seen that work effectively?
Well, you don't have a data page, which is beautiful. So the thing is, you're going to talk about the things that are more important as a newer brand. And I would definitely hone in on this item, which I hope everybody understands, because it's the key piece of your entire business that you're going to lean into heavily in those early meetings when nobody knows who you are, the buyer's never heard of you. The product. Your product better be friggin' amazing. Taste and texture. If it's sitting on the table, you have to have the confidence to be able to say, try this. And I'm leaving you with this ideology of stop wishing, stop thinking, stop being super optimistic about something that may or may not be there. And what I mean by that is either your product is absolutely amazing and it's not subjective, or it's not. And if it's the latter, then you can't key into those things that I just talked about as far as being an early new brand sitting at the table with very little to no data or all these other things that everybody wants to pull out.
The product has to be good. I mean, and I feel like there's a lot of founders that unfortunately take that for granted when they're pushing for, these really unique ingredients, especially as you kind of move to the functional side that have like more earthy, funky taste to it. And right, like it doesn't have to be sweetened and full of sugar to taste good, but someone has to try it and say like, oh, like I like this. I mean, I think one of the big catches in this space is a lot of times you're presenting to one, maybe two buyers, and their personal preference goes a long way, right? Like what happens when a buyer doesn't like your product? Like what, like is it just, but maybe other people do. Like how do you approach that situation when like you might not like it, but we have tons of customers who do?
I I think that's a bad problem to have. A lot of people like to, well, it's a good problem to have. It's a bad problem. No, it's a bad problem to have. The product should not be subjective in that way. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's like the core value. And I got to tell you, this is from experience. Our first product, when I first launched, I had no food and beverage experience, was like, okay. It was like, okay. That's why I got punched in my face so many times. And I'm telling you now, get it right first. Get it right early so that there isn't even a question about the buyer liking it or not. Some people would love to come in and go, well, they didn't like it. He or she didn't like it at the table, but don't worry, we've got thousands of customers. But why are you even putting yourself in that position? So I'm just a big believer in getting the product right first and having everybody love it. And I say again, there's always going to be the one person, two people, you'll get a bad review. That's normal. But really be a firm believer that you've got a hit on your hands.
And I think if you look at every survey that exists, almost every survey for food, if you ask consumers to rank what's the most important attribute of the product, taste is almost always number one. hands down across any consumer group, right? Whether you're healthy or conventional, natural, it's all about taste. And so I think you have to hit that on the head.
I'll leave you with a piece here, which is unique in just the subject. You had talked about it, when they put this in it and they've got this, they got a probiotic and I kind of chuckle now that I'm in this thing. I mean, everybody sees the same ads, right? Everybody sees the new headline that says disruption. What is that? Disruption? I just saw another seltzer company with a spiked whatever. They're using disruption. What did you disrupt? You're not disrupting anything. Focus on an amazing product and focus on your customer. That's it. That is the name of the game. Great product, great customer service. Bring those two together. Maybe you have a chance.
My favorite too is when someone says, hey, I went into the chip aisle and I couldn't find something that I liked. It's like, no, there's thousands, there's hundreds of brands out there, right? Like, you're not the first person to disrupt that space. But anyway, you can go on and on about that. Ayesha, question for you though. Ian had a question on how you are able to get your customers to actually try or to make sure they have a good experience with your product at home, since they might prepare it differently, requires baking, right? Have you had experiences where they're using it incorrectly and that causes issues?
All the time. I mean, not everyone's a home baker, which is fine. But I think, one, there's a huge opportunity for conversion there. So we have done an incredible job of beefing up our customer experience team. I still respond personally to DMs and emails and complaints, because it's important for them to know we're not just going to leave their comments in the ethosphere and just let it die. It's really important that we are responsive. We respond to every complaint within 24 hours. And there's people that definitely are hopeless. That's just the way it is. But they keep trying, so they're buying it. So you keep going. And then really, for us from a segmentation basis, though, our core customer, I always tell everyone, is not the Pillsbury customer. It is an at-home baker who wants to save the time creating a biscuit that's probably just as good as ours, right? But doesn't need to go through the work of it all. So that's really created a huge opportunity for us from a selling perspective, because that's what's created the data point over time. I don't rely on the data points like Mark was saying, like your ranking's great, you have high growth. Everyone's got high growth here in this room right now, right? It's really easy to say you have high growth if you're selling 1,000 and all of a sudden you're selling 2,000. That's easy to do, right? So it's the story piece was, okay, I looked at the category. Pillsbury was consistently down. All of a sudden the category is up. The incremental category growth is equal to mine. So that means I brought new customers, which validates again that I have a home baking customer, or somebody who doesn't care about the convenience of just biscuits alone. They care about homemade biscuits, right? So you really got to understand your value proposition. And then in terms of, Ian also asked.
Because I think about, like, when you're sending product to buyers, do you send it to them frozen and kind of expect them to try it, make it at home, or do you send already cooked product to them?
Yeah, so it was a blessing and a curse, COVID. So curse in that my house turned into a UPS store. Blessing in that, honestly, for the first time ever, these buyers had to fucking bake. And because usually I'm hauling ass finding the closest Airbnb with an oven, and I am bringing like a giant pastry thing of, breakfast pastry over to these meetings, right? And it's not easy. But that's typically how I do it, to make sure that they tasted it. Because they're not going to, I have buyers that literally, if you send them product, it's literally going into this magical freezer, and all they use it for is planogramming. They don't actually taste it. So COVID was a blessing, because by some miracle, I think we were one of the few brands in the frozen category that were still trying. So we shipped, and somehow they gave us their addresses, and they were forced to make it. And the beauty was, it was probably not them. It was probably like their wives or husbands. And then the kids were eating it. So if the kids like it, they buy it. So that's been transformational for us in terms of getting the buyers motivated to try it. Do buyers suck at baking? Probably. But, you got to think, again, back to the premise of what Mark said. If it tastes good, if you know it's good, even if it's absolute shit, if you've burnt it, it's still going to taste better. They're just going to go, oh, I burnt it, right? Like they're not going to go, oh, this product doesn't bake, right? I mean, that they're just not going to do that. So really focusing in on taste qualities first, and then also making it easy for them to understand. I think in the 6 years we've had product on shelf, we've done 4 cooking instruction iterations over time, including one that says take it out of the box. So, you don't think you need those things, but you do. And I think it's really important that you start to really think through what can make the process easier if you do have an item that does require preparation, to improve that over time. Don't just say, well, you're an idiot, leave it alone. Like you do have to make those accommodations over time.
Yeah, definitely. And you would think that those simple instructions don't matter, but there's always someone that's going to mess it up and then blame you.
And I mean, it was a Tuesday buyer that messed it up for me. So it wasn't like it was like not intuitive. I just, a customer, it was literally a buyer that put the whole damn thing in the oven. So
yeah, that's funny. Tina, I'd love to kind of circle around, because I know there's been a lot of talk in terms of making sure your product is actually on shelf in a lot of the retailers. And I've heard from brands who are like, when do I hire a merchandiser to actually go on and check my pricing, check my shelf placement, and make sure that we're in stock? Like, what's the right level of company size or number of doors have you found that to be really valuable at?
So it's really once it is expanded beyond the ability of your team to do it. So if you are in New England and that is, you can drive to all of the Whole Foods and you can spend the night at your aunt's and drive to a few more, definitely keep doing that, because you understanding what is out there is more important than anything else. The other thing is, when you then expand regionally or you expand to so many retailers, you just can't do it, you will have the context of why it is so important and why is it not on the shelf and why did you have to talk to the store department manager and it was so simple, it was in the back warehouse. You need to have gone through that so that you understand how challenging it actually is for the retail workers to be on top of your brand, because they have 30 to 40 to 70,000 SKUs, depending on whether they're a decently small grocer, a larger grocer, or something in the Target range, right? And then you've got the superstores of Walmart with 100,000. So you need to understand how big your retailer is, how challenging it is for them, and then go do it. I definitely recommend, if you've been in Target for a year, this might be a good time to make sure that you actually have the inventory that's in the system. So one thing that we've done for clients is go in, see if it's on the shelf or in the freezer or in the refrigerated aisle. If it is, great. If it's not, see if there's any in the back. If there's not, Target is really great about having the department manager wipe it down to 0, write it off, right? They've had shrink. Either they've had theft or they've had spoilage or they've had, it broke, but they didn't write down exactly what broke. And so now in Target, that automatically pulls inventory from the distribution center. If you don't have inventory there, now you need to reorder. So it's a one-time cleanup of that. Certain retailers are very good at getting a product launched, but they're not that great at maintaining it. So you might have launched with 5 SKUs and all of a sudden there's the 3 best sellers that are there. It's good to go back in and make sure that at least the 4th one is there. Or if you have 15 SKUs and they have 8, one of the things that we call is fix the mix and say, for your area, because your category better than that store manager. For your area, you should have the best sellers, which are these. And if they're limited by scope, you might as well just get the 8 best sellers. And if they're not limited by size, maybe get out to number 9, number 10, or something else. And finally, what we always say is data is critical and data is important, and at the regional level and at the retailer level. So get it down to looking at the information that's relevant for you. I call all of the market share data scorecard data. It's great. That is how you know that you're winning. That is how you know that you're selling. And that's fantastic. But no coach has ever played a game or a Super Bowl by looking at the dashboard or looking at the scorecard. They do it by looking at their playbook. And the information that you're getting of what is on the shelf, how quickly the retailer themselves are replenishing, how often you have to go do it for them, how often signage works, how often secondary placement or a promotion works. That is your playbook that applies to your product, your category, and that retailer. And again, seasonality, you know, some products don't have the, you know, aren't impacted by season, and some really do well with holidays, when the families come together, when people celebrate, when people, you know, watch something together. And that's going to come more and more now that the vaccines are in sight.
No, I think that's great. And what I see happen to founders all the time is once they begin to expand their store count beyond where they can manage it, they hesitate to bring on, say, someone to help with merchandising because it's an additional cost that they didn't have to pay for before, and a lot of times didn't budget for. And so, right, it comes out something that's unexpected for them, but it leads to a lot of lack of love at retailers, right? If you don't have someone actually going, maintaining the relationship and keeping up with the stores, then sometimes that product might fall by the wayside and you won't even know it just by looking at your data.
I've always said to founders, the first 3 retailers that you get into, you will get into based on your product is differentiated. It is a good additional fit for their category. It brings in that shopper that maybe they were looking for, like a younger shopper or a more, a baker, something like that. And maybe the fact that you are unique as a founder, and that is, you know, something that is being looked at more now with a more diverse supplier base. But numbers 4, 5, and 6, they will assume that you have data. And at that point, it is about your velocity. It is about your sell-through, because that lets them know that either A, you are supporting those retailers the way those retailers like to be supported and helping things go through, and that shopper has been trained, or your product is just that amazing that word of mouth helps it fly off the shelf. And if it flies off the shelf, there's still a reason for you to double check and merchandise, because you might sell 30 every single weekend and that might make you happy. But if you've sold those out by Saturday morning at 11 o'clock, you have that data to say those stores should be ordering more, should give you a little bit more shelf space, and should spend the time to re-merchandise on Saturday mornings.
So Jordan, and if I could just say, obviously as a frozen brand, I didn't think merchandising was going to be important because it's like already expensive to be in frozen. But I think one of the things that shifted was, again, if you really start accounting for your ROI on all your expenditures, you start to really realize that merchandising isn't like, I think it's easy for founders early to think of merchandising as a demo expense where it's like a marketing expense, and it's not. It's a selling expense. If you do it right, it's going to increase your sales. So you actually do get money back on that investment, where you won't with slotting, you know, you won't with a demo necessarily. So it's really important to put that into perspective as you start building in your budget. Like, what do you really think you're going to get back on being able to easily find your product? And, you know, put that against that budget, right? Really understand that that gives you more opportunity and leverage. So as we've grown, for example, using survey.com for a lot of our conventional customers, all the incremental dollars we really put back in because it is effective over time. People do crazy shit to your stuff. I mean, if you're not there, you don't know it.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you from experience too, right? Like when I first launched at Mariano stores here in the Midwest, our product, you know, our cheese squares came in a multi-serve pouch. They were kind of like an energy bar, but not in an energy bar shape. And when we launched, stores put our product across the store. We were in the energy bar aisle. We were in the kind of bag snack aisle. We were in certain like organic, natural, like snacking sets. We're even in the like health and supplement section as well. And I would walk into the store and for 15, 20 minutes, I could not find the product. And, you know, that's when I realized like, oh, like this is when it really starts to matter, right? Like I know if like when we started off working for Whole Foods, we had a much better experience. I was actually going in and stocking. We had a better control like where the product was. But for the larger retailers that you work with, you lose a lot of that visibility if you're not constantly checking. Even when I was like, I couldn't even find my own product. So how are consumers going to?
Another thing is, let me add to that. All of your marketing goes together. The brands that I've always recommended, put the logos of the retailers above your map. And if you're difficult to find, say, In Roche, I'm in the plant-based aisle and organic aisle, or the gluten-free aisle, whereas in Whole Foods, I'm right next to dairy. And in this other retail, I'm in the supplements area. That will help people find it. And if they find half of the map of the United States, they're going to understand that there's the rest of the map of the US underneath that. But if you're putting those logos underneath or completely missing it, you're not. They're not going to necessarily scroll down and see it. And you're better off letting them know that you're in a Whole Foods and a Sprouts, and they'll say, oh, the one next to my home or the one next to the office, than actually making them put in a zip code and showing them a bunch of retailers they may or may not go to.
I'd like to add some context too, though, because my assumption is that there's probably a lot of early founders here too. And it's kind of one of these things, again, I talk openly about the money needed in food and beverage, because we're talking merchandising and again, I'm going to act like I'm new to the game. That's why you need a lot more money than you think. This is an expensive business. I'll say it again. This is an expensive business. The money you thought you needed, like multiply that by like 5 and then probably do it again. And so here's my one little tidbit, because I like to kind of play on the early stage because it sounds amazing. Like, wait, Sprouts and then I got merchandising teams. That's not how it works when you're early. You're like fighting. You're like struggling to get week to week. And so here's your playbook. You don't need to get to this place yet. Merchandising, and as much as I love it, I mean, we're starting to do it, and we know through experience what it can and can't be and things like that. But when you're early, focus on some regional partners and go do it yourself. Be there, be a soldier, get somebody else, and make sure that you have a business, a viable one, because you're demonstrating what it's like that they're talking about now, which is super important, super valuable. The survey.coms are super valuable, but you've got to get there. You've got to get there. And before you do that, before you lay out that cash, you should go prove it out yourself and understand what it means to merchandise. Understand what it means when your product is out of stock or should be restocked over a weekend. Really immerse yourself in the business, because then you'll understand why, and why you can explain to an investor or somebody who's going to let you borrow or give you $100,000, why you need to put dollars against your product in store. So I hope there's some value there to the early folks who are like, wait, what are they talking? Anyway, just 2 cents.
Completely agree. And valuing yourself and putting a cost on that work that you're doing, so that if you were to hire someone else to do the same, was it going to cost you? There's going to be a little bit of premium. So you build that into your pricing, and then you can measure the return on that as well.
I'll just say $3,000 a month, $4,000, $5,000. It's a lot of money when you're early in the business. When you're like second stage of the business, people don't understand that the extra $5,000 a month, that's $5,000 net. It is not the same as you just increasing your sales by $5,000, right? Everybody knows this is a margin business. Do the math. So anyway, just information. I like to just, there you go.
No, that's all perfect.
I'll just chime in. We'll say, we started really early merchandising, and we had to, and I'll tell you, it's not always the cheapest depending on the region you're in. In DC, it's $25 a person to get out there and change some shit. Tina's group is actually incredibly cost effective. So highly recommend that you find what you can afford, right? Like people do it all the time where they hire part-time help. They're just as bad. So and you're paying them benefits, you're paying their mileage, you're paying them, that all adds up too. So be careful and really think. I think the first thing Tina said was smart. When you're out of your home region, you should start looking at it. And it's not like you need to check every store every day. Be smart about it. If you got $10,000, tell Tina you got $10,000. their team will say, that means you can afford this. And then you got to go, is that enough? Yes or no? Don't be stupid and go, okay, I'll find 20 more grand, right? Like take the 10 and apply it wisely. If your top customer is Whole Foods and you know it's a wreck, get to Whole Foods as quickly as possible. Like I'm telling you this as in my own experience, and frozen is a fucking nightmare. Our stuff is all over the place. I've had to stop Whole Foods from putting it in the gluten-free freezer because I don't want people to die. You know, like you can't do that stuff. And it's really, really hard if you don't live in California and you got to get there because they're putting it there. I had our product in the refrigerated set at a store. And, you know, like, that's why I'm like, you don't know these things unless you have foot soldiers doing at least one site visit once you're out of home. So think smart. There's people out there that will do and help you, right? It's not always best to just do it yourself, depending on your category, depending on the frequency, depending on the knowledge. That's the other thing. You know, when you're starting out, you don't know shit. So like, you're going to walk in a store and be like, yeah, that looks right. I learned so much by watching merchandising teams because I was like, wait a minute, holy shit, you could put a sticker on the box without me paying extra? And I'm like, yeah. Oh, you know, like, so now it's all of a sudden not just them checking on the product. They also IRC'd it. They also moved it. I didn't know you could move stuff. They were like, no, fuck this. We're putting it at eye level. And they like took it and they moved it and they moved the sticker. And I was like, oh, okay. I wouldn't have known that stuff. So like you got to think about your product. You got to think about your category. You got to think about what's wrong and, you know, do what's best for your brand at that level. Right. And know that there are people willing to work with you. There's tons of folks out there in the merchandising game, not just the ones that you use at Walmart that are like incredibly expensive. Like there are teams out there that are working to make this more effective because it's an ongoing problem for small brands.
I love those perspectives. We got a bunch of questions that are coming into the chat. So love to kind of get those out rapid fire too. So there's a couple of questions by Nick and James on how do you know or measure the category average velocity so that you can know if your velocity is above average or not? How do you go about doing that?
I'll just say first, you don't do that. So first, you got to ask your buyer what's acceptable for your product type at your level. They're not going to make you hit, as long as you're not stupid, right? Like if you're not going to Food Lion as your first foray into grocery, chances are your buyer's going to say, I've never had this product before. I have no idea how it's going to do, but I need it to turn at least this. So your goal is whatever your buyer says first, right? And you work towards that. Because the category, I'm in a crazy category. I'm the only natural brand in my category. And there's no way in hell I'm doing the turns that a company that spends $4 million at Publix a year is going to turn. It's just not going to happen. But what am I bringing? More dollars per door. What am I bringing? More profitable items in the category because I'm offering margin structures that are beneficial. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. You need to talk to your buyer and get category expectation first. And if it's something crazy, I think you got to walk away from anyone in your category that's telling you to do more than a case a week. Because like, that's a no. You're never going to hit that.
Nice. Mark, any perspective on category velocities?
You just asked the buyer. Where am I at? They'll tell you. Nobody's shy in this business. Just remember that. So they'll tell you where you should be, and they won't overshoot the number because everybody wants you to win. That's the name of the game. So they'll tell you.
I think one thing that
is slightly different. So it's important for you to hit what they would like you to hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they know that they're a convenience one and you're not really going to be at the top rate, they're going to have a different rate for you than a different store. A different retail.
I'll tell you one thing that I didn't realize going through when we first launched at Whole Foods, we did that. We asked the buyer, like, what's a good case movement? And or a good kind of velocity. And they talked in cases. At the time, we were selling like it was a 16 unit case of our like pouches, right? And so if we're selling that case, that stocks out the entire shelf going back, but it means we're selling less cases per time period. And so we ended up shortening that to, I think it was like 6 units per case, or it was 8. There was something, less that we did because that way we could sell twice as many cases with the same number of product, and the buyer spoke in cases, not units, which is really interesting. And so by doing that, right, you don't want to sell a 2-unit case or something that's going to be like stand out like crazy. But for a lot of buyers, like they want to know that they are ordering your product, often enough. If they don't remember the last time they ordered your product, they're often not going to order it again. All right, so a couple other questions that came down in here. When's the right time to pay for data, like spends data or IRI data? And how have you used it?
I personally, to me, I think it's the second that you get into conventional, because that's a black hole and you don't get the same great visibility into your day-to-day like you do at Whole Foods. So at that point, when you're getting in there and realize too, like, just like Mark said, they're rooting for you, but you got to be rooting for them too. So you got to know how you're positioning in the category. You don't want to be at the bottom because then they took the risk on you and your ass is last in place in the category. Then they're just like, oh man, I took this risk. Remember, these guys are bonused out of how you do, right? Like, you got to do well because then they make money because they picked you. So you got to make sure that you're aligning yourself there. And if you have no idea what the category is doing, then chances are you won't stay on.
Yeah, so true. Do you, and Ayesha, do you have a strategy when you're launching into new stores that says, hey, we're willing to invest this much money or this much in promos, or even like lose this much money at first to gain that trial and traction before you ramp up?
Yeah, we do very unsophisticated, but an ROI analysis by retailer. There's door expectations, there's COGS, there's shipping expectations, every component of it. And we try to break even inclusive of slotting within a year. If it's a really large retailer, 1,000 doors, 18 months on the slotting. So if you're not doing that, it's really risky for young brands because chances are you're only given really 6 months to prove yourself. And you're running into the danger zone that, if you don't make some miracle happen, it's not going to work. We're a highly seasonal item, so that's why we give ourselves a 12-month headway, because sometimes we don't launch during the season. So we want to make sure we get there, and the buyer wants that too. They know when the hell this stuff sells. So it's not like this, rocket science. But I would just say, like, depending on your category, you have to understand how long your buyer is going to give you, and you got to make sure that you're going to hit an ROI. When you work backwards, if it's saying that you got to sell, like in frozen, trade benchmarking for spending in frozen is between 20 and 30%. So we factor that into the budget and all the other things. And if we're not break even within a year, then we don't go to that account yet.
I think that's so key, and right, it touches on something that Mark mentions of how expensive this is in this industry, right? Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, I naively went into it thinking, all right, I'll start making money after my first 3 weeks selling in a store, right? Like, everything had to be like ROI positive after that, and it really limited how much I was willing to invest and how fast the product was able to move. And I think that's a mistake a lot of founders make, is they expect the store, the retailer, to do the selling for them. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, in a lot of cases, the store is just a vessel for the customer to come and pick up your product, right? Like, the retailer is not actively pushing product at their expense, especially for newer brands, to get you to move. So you, as a brand and the founder, have to really invest in that. Mm-hmm. Last question as we kind of wrap up here. Are there any retailer kind of marketing programs that you've participated in that have been effective, either like catalogs or working with them in their app or anything like that you've seen a good return on?
Mark, do you want to answer this one for yourself, since I feel like I've been hogging up too much airtime?
You can have it. You're doing a great job. I like listening. It's fun for me too. I'll just throw in a tidbit every once in a while. Any off-shelf stuff that you could potentially get is always a key one. So that's my take on that one. But please go ahead.
I agree. Off-shelf is great. In frozen, it's very limited when you get those. So if you do get them, take them. I'd say catalogs are bullshit. Don't spend the money if you don't have to. Chances are, if someone's going to sell, they're going to sell direct to that retailer because they already have a relationship. They're not using the catalog. So it's kind of a lie. I think the better money spent is relationship development. Don't forget that the first job you have in CPG is sales. If you're not good at it, find a good salesperson. Like, you can't just think that because it tastes good, it's going to sell itself. Like, you need to understand relationship development. So, like, it's actually better to spend $1,000, like, basically greasing the hands of buyers, like your distributor buyers, and giving them an incentive that if they hit X cases in the month, that they get this little bonus, or they can get into a raffle, than it is for you to go and like spend it on a catalog so you can be in something with 75,000 other SKUs. Like, that's just not how it's going to work. I'd also say too, just a shameless plug for those that are POC or female founded, get registered, because you get a lot of it perks and incentives, and the world's finally changing and you get called out for being woman owned or POC owned. So you get, preferential treatment, you get free ads, you get free or matching. So if you do a TPR and you want to do $1 off, they'll match another $1. So it's really beneficial to fill out that paperwork. I know it's a pain, but do it now while you're still small and your cap table doesn't look crazy and you can still qualify, because it's worth it in the start for sure.
Absolutely love that. So we're just at the end of the hour here and wrapping it up. Ayesha, Tina, Mark, thank you so much for joining. I know there are tons of information in here. And so the audience, thank you so much for all your great questions. Hopefully there's a number of tidbits that you were able to take back and implement in your business. I will be providing a recording of this conversation out via email for everyone who joins. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. And if you do have any additional questions for our panelists, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to reroute those to our panelists as well. But thank you so much for joining. Have a great Tuesday. Have a great rest of your week. And let's get selling. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.